Are you recording? Maybe.
Check, check.
Okay. So like I said, we're changing gears a little bit this morning. We'll talk about study habits on Monday. Would you remind me? We'll talk about that because I read some interesting research I shared with some of you guys. I will say, the more involved you are in our time here together, like when I'm talking, when we're discussing, the better you do in your tests. I could literally graph it based upon the amount of questions asked during class. You might have been. So I'm encouraging you, stay involved. Okay, so we're talking about immunity, right? We've been spending our time talking about the lymph system, the lymphatic system, and how it's connected to immunity. And it's connected mostly because, the lymphocytes are actually created there in the lymphatic system, right? And as the lymph gets filtered through the vessels and through the lymph nodes, that's where the actual attacking of those, or one place, or the attacking of those different bacterial pieces are. But we want to talk about immunity today. And of course, we're talking about defending against pathogens. Pathogens being things that cause disease, right? And when you have a disease or have a pathogen that is actively working and attacking cells, we call that an infection, right? And the body really has two ways it deals with infection. No worries. Please, yeah, please. The first one is what we call non-specific. And just like the name, it means it's not specific to a specific or to a certain bacteria or virus or problem, right? It basically is keeping everything out. Whereas our specific defenses, which you would actually call immunity, those are responding to a particular target. So they can't deal with everything, they just deal with one type of pathogen. Does that make sense? And when we think about immunity, you're thinking about the specific immunity, those specific kinds of defense, like the antibodies that we build up to different diseases. But let's talk, the specific defenses are carried out by the lymphocytes, which we'll talk about that, right? The T and the B lymphocytes. And they work together, again, to protect the body. So let's go through the list of these non-specific defenses. The first one is species resistant. The good news is our bodies cannot be infected by every type of pathogen there is in the entire world. Hallelujah. Okay? There are some diseases, there are some bacteria, some viruses that only attack certain types of animals. Now, if you really want to get into the details of why, again, there's lots of good material out there for that. But it basically has to do with how the proteins and how the cells are put together, that certain viruses like certain kinds of cells, or they like certain temperatures, like different body temperatures. Different animals have different body temperatures. Birds have a much higher temperature than we do. So some bacteria, some viruses really like birds, but in our cooler bodies, they can't handle, they can't work as well. Does that make sense? So this species resistance basically is saying that, hey, we're defended against being infected by those, let's say, those bird viruses or bacteria, simply because they just don't like our species. Does that make sense? Nothing the body is doing, it's just, hey, you're lucky enough to be human, so you don't get that disease. But if you were a cow, or if you were a dog, or if you were a bird, you would. Does that make sense? Certainly helpful for those veterinary folks. They don't have to worry necessarily about that cross-communication, cross-contamination. Okay? Our second is mechanical barriers. So what is our big mechanical barrier? Our skin, right? Beautiful, okay? And the skin is a huge one. And when it's unbroken, i.e. there's no cuts on it, it's very difficult for pathogens to get in, right? But what about all those open places in our bodies, right? Our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our ears, our genitals. How do we protect those areas? The mucus, right? All of those places have some sort of mucus, and it's all specialized in different ways. The mucus in our mouth is not the same as what's in our ears, Okay? But all of those things help prevent the entry of those pathogens. Think about your lungs as you breathe in all of that lovely air that's all nice and pure, right? No pathogens there at all. The mucus in the lungs actually just collects it. In your throat, there's this whole lining in your trachea of that mucus that helps collect that. You know you're sick when you start bringing all that stuff up, right? And it's no longer that nice clear mucus, it's that yellowy, nasty stuff. Or if you're actually nice and sick, then you get that nice brownie. It's tasty, right? Yeah, it's good stuff. So are you comfortable with that as a mechanical barrier, right? You are simply trying to prevent the bacteria from getting in, prevent the pathogens from entering. We cool? Number 3, you've got chemical barriers. There's a couple different ones that we use here. So your stomach, are you comfortable? You put lots of very non-good things in your stomach. I'm not talking about like sugar or fats or those kind of things. I'm talking about pathogens, right? So what is your body's defense against that? In your stomach? The acid, the gastric acid. And it is a strong acid, has a very low pH, and it works very well. And it will literally kill many of the bacteria that we eat, and we eat an awful lot of them. Let's just be honest. Okay? There's another place you may not have thought about, though, where these chemical barriers are present, and that's in your eyes. Again, open to the world, right? All the time, well, most of the time, unless it's A&P class and you're sleeping. Right? So there's actually these chemicals in your eyes that kill the pathogens. They're these lysosomes, or lysozyme, I guess, is lysozyme. That would be the actual name of the chemical in the tears that helps kill these pathogens. Did you know your tears are actually antibacterial? Kind of cool. Sorry? I would imagine that's because there is some salt in them. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, a lot of the basis of mucus does have that saltiness to it. Again, think of your crying or the snotties, or yeah, there's that saltiness to it. Are we cool? Yes, sir. Quick, please. The second chemical barrier are interferons. And these are hormone-like peptides that actually serve to kill viruses, which is an interesting thing. So if you're not comfortable with how viruses work, it's very simple. A virus is basically a strand of DNA-ish material. It's really RNA. And it can't do anything by itself. What it does is it comes in here and it finds this, let's say I'm a virus that really loves Eric cells. And so I come and I find an Eric cell. This is a good Eric cell right here. And I literally will come in and take over his DNA and replace it with my own as a virus. And then he will start producing more Eric viruses. And it gets all over this lovely Daisy cell, and that's a problem because we don't want the Daisy cell to turn into an Eric virus. You with me? So when this Eric cell, in its last plea for help before it's overrun, it releases these interferons that actually tell the Daisy cells and the Hannah cells around it, hey, virus coming. Start making the enzymes that will kill viruses. You with me? Not specific. Not that it's like actually attacking just Eric viruses only. It's just saying, hey, there's a bad thing here. Let's get it out of here. Does that make sense? Okay? So again, that is the interferons, which is kind of a cool thing, right? Again, it always fascinates me how the body just sees these things and reacts to them.
So the virus has to infiltrate the cell and change that DNA, and it has to start replicating a lot before they release.
It's basically as it's being infected. I wouldn't go into all the details of what the actual process would be, but it's just a defense mechanism of the cell to respond to that virus attacking. Starting to attack, yeah. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's sending out the help signal. Help, guys, I'm being attacked. Start making these interferons that attack.
So then the cell gets destroyed from it?
It would, sure. It basically just gets overrun by the virus. So it's not destroyed like dead.
No, the interference.
Yes. And again, there's many other things that do that try and combat it. This is just one way. And again, friends, want to make sure you hear me. This is non-specific, right? Those interferons are not targeting Eric viruses. I'm sorry to make you a virus. My apologies. But they are just simply saying, hey, this is not one of us. Let's attack it. Sir?
Where do the interferon, or where are they kind of created?
In the cell. Where in the cell? I can't say I know for sure. I think it's just a protein, so it would just be a specific from the ribosome, but I'm not positive.
It's not like just a specific kind of cell, it's just cells in general.
I think it's just all cells in general can produce them. I'm not positive. That's a good question. Okay, our fourth, and I think there's 8 of these guys if I remember correctly. Our fourth non-specific defense is fever. What you say, huh? But I thought fever was a bad thing. Like when we get sick and you have a fever, then you take medicine to get the fever down, right? Well, but here's the reason why fever is good. What it does is it increases the temperature, right? And like I said, different bacteria, different viruses have a very small window of comfort that they have with temperature-wise. And if you get them outside of that, it can mess that up, right? So some of the other things that it does is it reduces the amount of iron in the blood, and that therefore it gives fewer nutrients for these viruses and bacteria to grow. And also, when I increase temperature, it makes things go faster, right? Just think about our work in chemistry, right? The higher the temperature, the faster stuff are moving. It's basically stimulating the body to say, hey, we have a problem. Would you please attack whatever it is as a problem? Does that make sense? So therefore, I would argue that actually a little bit of fever is good. Like if your fever is at that 100 or so level, I wouldn't do a ton to try and get rid of it. Hear me now. I'm not saying taking medicine is bad, but the fever is actually helping you, right? But if that fever is up in the 101, 102, 103, now if your temperature gets too high, your cells can't handle that, and they can actually die. You can die simply from a fever. Now, the fever is caused by infection, so you wouldn't say you died of fever, but that causes problems. Does that make sense? And certainly if you're in that 104, 105, 106 range, you'll be sent to the hospital, and they'll like literally pack you in ice. They will put ice all around you to try and bring your temperature down because your brain just cannot handle it being that hot. At that point, it would be like it's like a last desperate measures to try and stop this. And it would rather you live and maybe have some damage and some problems than die. Does that make sense? Like it's just doing all it possibly can to fight this infection. It doesn't necessarily, I guess there's no brain to say, oh no, don't go that high, it's too high. You know. It's a good question. It's a good question. Are we good here with fever? All right, so let's roll through them again. What was our first one? Species resistance, right? Then what? Mechanical barriers, right, like our skin and mucus. And then our chemical barriers, which we included what? Our interferons that are produced. And what else? Sure, the stomach acid, right? The stomach acid and the lysozyme, not lysosomes, lysozyme in the tears. All right, our next one here is inflammation. And I would put inflammation on that same kind of category as fever, but not nearly as global. Like inflammation is fever in a small area. Does that make sense? You know the signs of inflammation: redness, swelling, heat, pain. You all learned those at one point, I think, when we talked about the integumentary system. This is signs that, hey, something is wrong here, right? Think about if you have, the classic for me are these stupid hangnails. This time of the year I get them all the time, right? You know, where a piece of your nail pulls out right along the edge. And I always get like this, it's always large enough that I can't actually pull it out, so I got to use my teeth. like I pull it out, and of course your mouth is such a clean place to then, use your teeth and get saliva all in there. So inevitably it gets infected, right? Am I just the only person this happens to? Okay, good. Okay. Lots of head shakes. Good. I thought I was crazy or something. And how do you know that that finger has an infection? It's red. It hurts. Have you ever have you ever felt the difference between it and another finger? Like, it's warm to the touch. You can actually feel the heat, the warmth of that inflammation present. Quickly, yeah. And so again, this is your body responding to a pathogen to try and kill it. Again, on a localized level, not your whole body becomes inflamed. That would be a fever, right? This is just one localized area, your finger, your leg, your thumb. Here are some things that happen when an inflammation occurs. The blood vessels dilate. That's why it gets red and gets warm, right? Because you got more blood flowing. There's an increase in the blood volume to the affected areas. If I widen the lumen, the opening of my vessels, right, by dilating, I'm going to get more blood. Make sense? I'm going to have lots of white blood cells come into that area. Why? Because they fight infection, right? They take care of that. Fibroblasts will appear. In fibroblasts, they blast out fibers, right? To actually make like a little sac around this area of inflammation. There's some wounds. I see a question. Give me 1 second. There are these wounds that I have seen. If they've been there long enough, let's say you've gotten this splinter that's gone in deep and you just cannot get it out, right? And it just stays in there. Your body actually like encapsulates it in this little fibrous capsule, and it will slowly push it out. It's the weirdest thing. Or think of somebody who has like shrapnel or from a bullet or from a war type injury. This will happen. The body will encapsulate it almost like it's sealing it off. This is foreign. I'm going to cover it up and not let it cause any more problems. Does that make sense? That doesn't happen very often. That would be only at the very extreme level of your inflammation for a long period of time.
With more blood going to that area, if everything is like tighter and normal how it usually is, like if you like open up a bunch of space, doesn't that create like air pockets somewhere else? It's like if you have like a closed capsule like water, right? And if you expand it, you have like air pockets.
So there wouldn't be there's not any air in the system at all. So there wouldn't be air pockets that would form. And it's not open to the outside, so there's not air from outside coming in. The blood pressure would decrease if I have the opening gets larger, yes. So I guess that would be your compensation you'd be looking for. Yeah. But no, it wouldn't, there wouldn't be any air. This is a closed system there. Sure, exactly. Yeah, and actually as part of that inflammatory process, it's again trying to get this thing, whatever it is, out of the body. Yeah. Make sense, my friends? So as a physical therapist, inflammation was something we fought all the time. You'd come and twist your ankle and you come, hey, Mr. S, can you look at this? And I'll check it out, sure. But often the treatment I give you is very similar. It's rice. Do you remember we talked about rice? Way back in the day? Rest, ice, compression, elevation. All of these things are looking to combat inflammation. And the reason why is we don't want so much inflammation present that it starts damaging other tissues that weren't already damaged. Right? There's no infection here. It's just that you've torn, you've twisted, you've pulled. And so we want to decrease the inflammation so it doesn't hurt the good cells that are still present. We cool? All right, our next one is phagocytosis. What does phagocytosis mean? Okay. Sure. Phago means what? Do you remember? To eat, to digest. Yeah. I like to go phago something very soon, right? Because I'm getting hungry, right? But I did phago a donut earlier, so I'm feeling all right. Okay? And the most active of these guys are the neutrophils and the monocytes. And these guys go out of the bloodstream when there's an injury, right? And the neutrophils will engulf the smaller type things. These are smaller of these phagocytes. And the monocytes are bigger ones, so they'll attack and eat the bigger kind of cells. And we're talking about cellular debris. We're talking about the actual invaders themselves, the pathogens. So again, our point is that these guys are actually eating those cells. Monocytes actually give rise to macrophages, which then stay around in specific tissues. So you have different macrophages in different tissues. And all of these guys together, we call them the mononuclear phagocytic system. And again, their point is that they are trying to get rid of that foreign stuff. And in the lymph system, this is how they do that. The phagocytosis is what they use in the lymph system to actually eat all those bad guys. Are you with me, my friends? I think that is the end, of the non-specific immunity. Oh, I guess they don't have them here, do they? Yes, and it's funny because I like NK cells. If I was to have a band, I think I'd call ourselves the NK, Natural Killer Cells. Doesn't that just sound like a good band name, don't you think? Anyway, I thought it was all right. The what? Nice, yes. I like Imagine Dragons. Actually, and that's a name I wish that I would have picked. It's a good band name. It's a good band name. Yes, so where's that at? Show me where that is in your book. Thank you. 395. Interesting. I wonder why they skipped over that. Huh. So the natural killer cells, if you're there on page 395, so you understand what those guys are. These are lymphocytes that are slightly different than those T and B cells. And how they're different is they aren't specific. Right? The T and the B cells, they would attack only the Eric virus. Right? You have specific cells that attack only the Eric virus. Whereas the NK cells, they're such natural killers that they just kill anything that's bad. Does that make sense? Maybe it should be the natural killer. That's a better band name, right? Yeah, definitely. They're not specific. This is still a non-specific immunity. Exactly. Any of these viruses, cancer cells, specifically they secrete these perforins, P-E-R-F-O-R-I-N-S. And again, they're just trying to kill the infected cell already. Are you with me, my friends? Thank you for pointing out that we didn't mention NK cells. I'm not sure why the PowerPoint didn't include them. If I was the NK cells, I'd be upset. I almost think of them like the little ninjas throughout your body. They're just there. They just adapt. They didn't do anything. They take care of anybody. All right? Okay, here's what I would love for you to do. In your groups here, I would love for you all to talk through these, it's 8, right? These 8 different non-specific immunities. And make sure those at your table, make sure you're comfortable with that. Okay? Go for it.